Frost on barbed wire, breath fogging under a sliver of moon. Ezra Voss walks a fence line at 4 in the morning, lantern swinging, boots crunching through crusted snow. 89 sets of horns catch the light like curved white blades. He stops at a heifer, presses a bare palm flat against her ribs, counts under his breath. Not pounds, not price, something else. He pulls a leather notebook from his coat, flips past pages crowded with names, dates, bloodlines going back 4 generations. He writes one word beside a calf's name, underlines it twice. By sunrise, Millrace Bend wakes to smoke curling from chimneys and the low bawl of ordinary black cattle in ordinary pens. Ezra Voss is already at the auction fence, watching a truck haul someone else's steers to market. He doesn't load a single animal, hasn't in 3 years. Neighbors say a man who won't sell his cattle for slaughter and won't sell them for beef money either isn't running a ranch. He's running something closer to a museum nobody asked to visit. What Ezra Voss was actually keeping those 89 Longhorns for was a question the whole county thought they already knew the answer to, and every one of them was wrong. If you're the kind of person who slows down for a good long story, you're in the right pasture. Hit subscribe so you don't lose this channel in the herd, and drop a comment telling me what town you're watching from tonight. Now, let's find out what Ezra Voss really had pinned up behind that barbed wire. Tarnhollow County sits in the sandhill country of western Nebraska, where the grass grows tall enough to hide a calf, and the wind never once asks permission. Millrace Bend is its only town worth the name: a feed store, a diner, a Lutheran church with a bell that cracked in '61 and was never replaced. The Voss place sat 11 miles out, on land Ezra's grandfather had homesteaded and every generation since had nearly lost. Ezra had lost the meat contract 2 winters back when the co-op stopped buying odd breeds. He'd lost his wife's steady teaching wage when the school consolidated. What he had left was land, Longhorns, and a mortgage nobody at the bank liked to discuss out loud. His wife, Verlie Voss, kept the books at the kitchen table under a bulb that flickered when the wind hit the lines. She never once told her husband to sell the herd. She did some nights, set her pencil down and look out at the dark pasture a long while before writing another number. Their boy, Cash, was 9, and had a chore his father gave him nobody else's son had: walk the fence at dusk, count horns, report anything wrong before dark set in for good. Cash took the job the way other boys took a football scholarship, dead serious, chin up, flashlight gripped like a trophy. At the county extension office, an agent named Odell Fenwick reviewed applications for the state's drought relief cost share program every spring. He'd looked over the Voss herd twice now and stamped both applications the same way: DENIAD, non-commercial breed, no verifiable market value. Longhorns, in Odell's professional opinion, were relics, rodeo stock, yard ornaments with attitude. He wasn't cruel about it. He simply believed the paperwork, and the paperwork said a Longhorn was worth roughly what a fence post was worth, minus the fence post's usefulness. Word of that denial made its way to the diner counter before Ezra even got home, the way county business always did in Millrace Bend. Men who'd never once walked his pasture had opinions about what belonged in it. The loudest of them belonged to Gilmer Stroud, who ran 400 head of registered black Angus on the finest bottomland in the county, and had never met a conversation he couldn't turn toward his own success. Gilmer liked to say a rancher's cattle told you everything about the man raising them. He said it about Ezra Voss more than once, and never quietly. Ezra heard it secondhand from the feed store clerk, a wiry young man named Thurl who liked Ezra too much to enjoy repeating it. Ezra only nodded, paid for his sacks of mineral supplement, and drove home past Gilmer's gleaming black herd grazing fat and glossy against green fescue. He didn't argue the point in town. He'd learned arguing with men like Gilmer Stroud was like arguing with weather, pointless, and it never once changed what came next. He went home instead and did what he always did. He walked his fence line and he kept his notebook. What Ezra Voss was really building, page by page in that notebook, was a bloodline. Not a herd for market, a herd for medicine. His grandfather had told him once, half in fever from an old sickness of his own, that Longhorns carried something in their blood the fancy breeds had bred clean out of themselves. An old resistance, hammered into them over centuries of Spanish stock running wild through fever-tick country, surviving what killed everything penned beside them. Ezra had spent 6 years testing it, culling careful, breeding for hardiness over horn length, hardiness over color, hardiness over every single thing a rodeo judge would pay to look at. He kept blood samples in a cooler in the mudroom, sent quarterly to a university lab 200 miles east, tracking titers most ranchers never heard of and wouldn't have cared to. Verley asked him once, stirring a pot at the stove without turning around, whether any of it would ever pay a bill. Ezra told her the truth, he didn't rightly know. He only knew that somewhere down the road, weather was going to turn hard on somebody's cattle, and when it did, he intended to be the only man in the county still standing with a healthy herd. Odell Fenwick came out to the Voss place that spring to walk the pasture himself, boots sinking in the mud, clipboard tucked under one arm. He watched Ezra draw blood from a calf's neck vein with a steadiness Odell admitted was impressive, then asked, not unkindly, what exactly Ezra thought he was proving. That a man can be wrong about a herd for a long time, Ezra said, before he's proven wrong himself. Odell wrote nothing on his clipboard that day. He just stood at the fence a while, looking at 80-some cattle that didn't look like money to him at all. Then came the letter that changed the clock on everything. The county's grazing insurance cooperative was restructuring, and any herd not verified disease-resistant under the new state livestock health mandate would lose its coverage entirely come the 1st of October, 6 weeks out. Without coverage, one bad outbreak could wipe Ezra clean, mortgage and all. The only path to renewal was a lab-certified resistance panel, run and confirmed before the deadline, on top of a fee Ezra didn't have sitting in any account. Verley read the letter twice at the kitchen table and didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The setback came in July, ugly and sudden. A hard hailstorm flattened 40 acres of his hay just before cutting. The crop he'd counted on to carry the herd and cover part of that lab fee through winter. Ezra stood in the wreckage of stalks the next morning, hail still melting in the low spots, and for the first time in 6 years, he considered selling off a third of the herd just to keep the lab money moving. He drove into town that afternoon meaning to call the university and cancel the panel outright. He got as far as the feed store parking lot before Cash climbed out of the truck ahead of him, flashlight still clipped to his belt loop from the morning's fence walk, and asked why they weren't finishing what they started. 9 years old, dead serious, chin up. Ezra sat behind the wheel a long minute, engine idling, boy waiting. Then he turned the truck around, drove home, and sold 2 hunting rifles and his father's old saddle instead. The lab got its fee. The herd stayed whole. Verley never asked where the saddle went. She just noticed the gun rack was bare and reached over once to squeeze her husband's hand. The blood work came back in September, 3 weeks ahead of the insurance deadline, thick with numbers Ezra had to read twice to believe were real. Every marker his grandfather swore by was there, stronger than the lab's own reference range. His herd wasn't just resistant to the standard livestock diseases the mandate screened for. It carried immunity markers against something older and meaner, a strain of tick-borne cattle fever the state hadn't seen a real outbreak of in 30 years, the kind that used to wipe out whole counties before quarantine lines were drawn across half of Texas to stop it. Odell Fenwick stamped the Voss renewal himself that week, no hesitation, and admitted quietly, just between the two of them at the fence, that he'd been wrong about what that herd was worth. It wasn't news yet. It was just paperwork filed in a county office, read by exactly nobody who mattered. Gilmer Stroud, 40 miles south on his green bottomland, hadn't heard a word of it and had bigger business on his mind entirely. A signed contract to ship 200 head of breeding stock to a continental beef cooperative buyer inside of 3 weeks, or forfeit the deal, and the money already spent preparing for it. The first cow went down on a Tuesday. Gilmer found her in the low pasture near the creek, legs splayed, coat soaked with fever sweat, blood dark in her urine on the trampled grass. By Thursday there were 6 more down the same way, and the vet's truck was parked at Gilmer's gate before sunup. The diagnosis came back within a day: bovine anaplasmosis, tick-borne, spreading fast through standing water nobody had drained after a wet summer. The county issued a quarantine on affected herds within the hour. No livestock movement in or out until testing cleared every animal, individually, one by one. Gilmer's contract deadline didn't care about ticks or quarantines. 200 head verified healthy, loaded and gone in 19 days, or the buyer walked and took the down payment penalty with him. Gilmer tested pen after pen himself, standing in his own barn in the gray morning light, watching his black Angus, his pride, his bottomland herd come back marked, one after another, unfit to ship. He was still standing there, clipboard shaking slightly in his hand, when the county vet mentioned, almost in passing, that there was one herd in Tarnhollow County that had already tested clean for exactly this strain. Ezra Voss's. Word moved through Millrace Bend fast that week, not from the diner counter this time, but from the county office itself, where Gilmer Stroud stood at the counter asking Odell Fenwick, out loud, in front of 2 other ranchers waiting their turn, whether the Voss Longhorns might be crossed into a commercial line fast enough to save a contract. Every man in that office remembered exactly what Gilmer used to say about a rancher's cattle telling you everything about the man. Nobody said it back to him. They didn't have to. The silence in that room did the talking for them. Ezra drove out to Gilmer's place himself 2 days later, not to gloat, but because Verley told him a neighbor in trouble was still a neighbor. He walked Gilmer's sick pens with the county vet, pointed out which bulls from his own herd carried the strongest resistance markers, and offered breeding stock at a fair price, not a punishing one. Gilmer stood at his own gate that afternoon and watched 89 Longhorns unload off a trailer onto his green bottomland, horns catching the low autumn sun, and said nothing at all for a long while. Then he shook Ezra's hand and meant it. The crossbred calves came healthy that following spring, carrying just enough of Ezra's old bloodline to shrug off what nearly buried Gilmer's contract for good. The Continental buyer got his shipment, 6 days late but healthy, and word of why traveled further than Tarnhollow County ever expected it to. University Extension agents from 2 states over came to walk Ezra's pasture that summer, notebooks of their own in hand. Odell Fenwick updated the county's valuation forms without being asked twice. Ezra never did put up a sign or throw himself a celebration. He just kept walking his fence line every morning, same as always, notebook in his coat pocket, Cash's flashlight beam bobbing along somewhere behind him. Verley still kept the books at the kitchen table, though the numbers looked different now, and some nights she still paused at her pencil, just to look out at the herd a while, not with worry this time, but something closer to pride. Gilmer Stroud still ran the finest bottomland in the county, but these days, when a stranger admired his black Angus grazing fat in the green grass, he pointed them 11 miles north instead, and told them the herd worth studying wasn't his. Some men spend a lifetime chasing what looks valuable. Ezra Voss just kept walking his fence every morning until the whole county finally learned to see what had been standing behind that barbed wire all along.